The United Nations launches investigations into a massacre said to have killed close to 900 people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Death toll rises to 21 and all missing persons are accounted for following Tuesday's terror attack at a hotel in Kenya. Chinese President's Special Representative Yang Jelchi begins Africa tour in Cairo, Egypt. Welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi alongside Uche with the business headlines.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Motorists stranded as a severe fuel shortage hits Addis Ababa. And public services ground to a halt in Tunisia as unions lead a strike demanding for better pay. All that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Uche. The United Nations has launched investigations into a massacre it says killed almost 900 people in the Democratic Republic of Congo in December. The clashes between the Banunu and Batende communities led the Electoral Commission to postpone the elections in the Yumbi territory until March. Chris Ochumringa has more.
The UN Human Rights Office in the DRC says the ethnic clashes occurred between the 16th and 18th of December in 4 villages in Yumbi territory. At least 890 people are reported to have been killed and more than 400 houses burnt in the clashes. But the DRC government says it only recorded 100 deaths. The violence prompted the Congolese government to postpone the elections to March. The tribal clashes were over a long-standing rivalry between the Banunu and Batende communities over a disputed piece of land. The UN says 16,000 people fled from the villages to the nape of Congo. In 2009, similar clashes forced 130,000 people to seek refuge in the Republic of Congo. Chris Ochumringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Still on the DRC, heads of state and foreign ministers of countries from the Southern African Development Community are meeting in Addis Ababa. They are focused on the security and other post-election developments in the country. Among leaders present are AU chairperson and also Rwandan President Paul Kagame, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, and Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. CGTN's Jerome Chala has more.
The Southern Africa Economic Bloc SADC, in which DR Congo is a member of, as well as the entire continent, are alarmed by the developing security situation in the country. Hence, they called this emergency meeting to discuss possible ways of taking DRC out of the woods. At the opening session of what is a closed-door summit, the outgoing African Union chairperson, Rwandan President Paul Kagame, said it is time to exert a continental effort towards pacifying DRC.
As we are here, we probably could find some common way of understanding what this problem is, and therefore that would give us the possibility of being useful and supportive of a resolution to the challenges faced in that country, DRC.
The leaders in attendance, including South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, as well as everyone else here, believe the post-election violence and the way some presidential candidates of the last polls of the country are handling their grievances remains distressing, but also are encouraged with some of the positive developments in the country.
Right now, we had come to assess the election and the outcome of the election. And we remain very concerned, as we have said over and over, about the levels of violence. But at the same time, we did commend the people of the Congo, because the violence that we have experienced now is much less than what we have experienced in the past when we had elections in the Congo.
Both SADC and the African Union are now calling on all parties in DR Congo to put the interests of their country first and avoid any form of violence. The emergency meeting too is expected to pass some strong decisions in this regard. Grumjara CGTN at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa.
And moving to Kenya now, and the death toll from Tuesday's attack on a hotel in Nairobi has risen to 21. This follows the discovery of 6 bodies in the Dusit D2 hotel and office complex on Wednesday evening during a search and rescue exercise. Now, while announcing this, Kenya's police boss also said among them was a police officer who succumbed to his injuries while undergoing treatment in a local hospital. At the same time, the Kenya Red Cross Society says that all 94 people that had been reported missing after the attack have been accounted for. Funerals have also begun for some of the victims.
As a community, we condemn the terror attack, and we say that we are also victims of this terrorist attack. We want to ask the Kenyans to understand that terrorism affects everybody, it's indiscriminate, and we need to condemn it wholeheartedly across communities and across religions.
They were bright young people who had a really super great future. I'm saddened that these terrible people, these evil people, have cut the lives of these young people at their peak when they were developing their capabilities to contribute to their own self-development, to their communities and to their country. So it is a terrible tragedy for us.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has met with his South Sudanese counterpart Salva Kiir in Cairo. The two were discussing boosting of bilateral ties between their two countries. The two presidents discussed mutual relations, regional issues, and South Sudan's peace agreement with rebel factions to end almost 5 years of civil war. Also addressed was negotiations over Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam. Egypt has previously been involved in South Sudan's political affairs and peace processes. In September, the two African leaders also met in Beijing during the Forum on China and Africa Cooperation. Sisi reiterated that his country will continue to offer aid and technical assistance to South Sudan, as well as proceed in mutual projects.
We are committed to provide all forms of technical and political support to reach comprehensive implementation of the peace agreement, beside enriching bilateral relations in the fields of education, healthcare, agriculture and aggregation, which will help in achieving sustainable development for both nations.
The people of Egypt and Egypt as a country are not just our hope, but our home for a very long time, even before our independence. I always say when I come to Egypt and the ministers who accompany me, most of them study here. We will not cut that relationship. That relationship we will keep, and we will promote it even more.
And Chinese President's Special Representative Yang Jelchi has visited Cairo, Egypt as part of his regional tour. He met Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Aboul Gheit, and other Egyptian officials. Prior to Yang Jelchi's arrival, the Egyptian parliament approved 2 Chinese loans to construct electric trains connecting the new administrative capital to other Egyptian cities. Here is Adel El Marouki with more.
The Chinese President's Special Representative State Councillor Yang Jelchi has received a warm welcome in Egypt. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi was keen to commend the significant progress in the Egyptian-Chinese relations. Yang Jelchi confirmed to el-Sisi China's keenness to enhance trilateral cooperation with Egypt in Africa. Egypt is chairing the African Union in 2019, which will allow for more cooperation opportunities in Africa.
2 months ago, Egypt has agreed on $18 billion worth of agreements with the Chinese side. This visit comes in the framework to implement these agreements and look for more opportunities.
In his meeting with Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli, Yang affirmed China's keenness to advance cooperation with Egypt within the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. Madbouli stressed that Cairo encourages more Chinese direct investments in Egypt, especially at the strategic Suez Canal economic zone.
We have seen great development in the Egyptian-Chinese relations. commitment. That was evident on both the political and economic level. 6 presidential visits took place in the past years, and the countries have bolstered the cooperation domestically and regionally. Egypt has a strategic geopolitical strength that makes it an important partner for Chinese Belt and Road vision. That makes it an important partner for China's Belt and Road vision.
As the director of the Office of Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee, Yang has discussed regional crises with Egyptian officials. Counter-terrorism efforts in the Middle East and Africa was the main talk during his meeting with El-Sisi's National Security Advisor, Faiza Abul-Naga. Enhancing cooperation between China and the Arab world led the conversation with the Secretary General of the Arab League, Ahmed Abul-Ghait.
The State Councillor's visit comes in line with the executive committee formed between Egypt and China to enhance their comprehensive strategic partnership. Yang Jelchi has delivered an invitation from President Xi Jinping to President El-Sisi to attend the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation scheduled this April in Beijing. It will be the 6th official visit by President El-Sisi to China. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Yang Jelchi then proceeds to Yaoundé, Cameroon, where he will meet with President Paul Biya. They will review Sino-Cameroon cooperation and relations from the past years. The leaders seek to strengthen ties this year and work to accelerate Chinese-sponsored projects in Cameroon. Cameroon's capital, Yaoundé, struggles to provide adequate clean water to its residents. To combat the perennial water shortage in the city, the government has partnered with a Chinese company to generate water from one of the country's main rivers. It is the biggest such project in Africa. CGTN's Penina Karibe is there and now tells us more.
The Sanaga River, one of the largest rivers in Cameroon, its length is about 600 kilometers, making it Cameroon's longest river. Its sheer size makes it one of the country's most important natural resources. But even with such a massive river, Cameroon's capital Yaoundé and its environs have inadequate water.
Children get up at 5:30 in the morning to fetch water until 8 a.m. when some of us go to our farms to fend for our families. We return home by midday to do laundry, and when we need water for that, and also we have to cook again using water. In the evening when the children are back from school, they need to shower, so we use water throughout the day.
The government is now looking to this giant river to solve the never-ending problem of water shortages in Yaoundé and the neighboring regions. It has started an ambitious project together with Sinomash, a Chinese company, to tap the water from this river and pump it 62 kilometers away in Yaoundé for distribution.
This project started in December 2016. Its main objective is to solve the water shortage problem in Yaoundé. It will provide 300,000 cubic meters of clean water to the 3 million people who live there. The current capacity for the water supply is 150,000 cubic meters, so when the project is complete, it will provide 450,000 cubic meters.
As expected, the initial stage of this project involved the construction of a catchment area, and this particular section of the river was chosen due to the low water currents. But building this buffer zone took 4 months, pumping out 100,000 cubic meters of water. From here, the water is expected to flow 7 kilometers away to the treatment plant, which is still under construction, after which it is pumped to 2 more stations before eventually reaching the capital city. It is the biggest such project in Africa, costing around $800 million. So far, its impact on the ground is already being felt.
We have provided 500 working opportunities for the locals, so we have eased the unemployment problem in this area.
And the benefits of this mega project will be felt long after it is complete.
It will attract more people into the area, like experts who will be there for maintenance in the various sites, others for administrative purposes. This will obviously lead to the flow of cash in the community, and the population will benefit from the project financially. This project will enhance a population boom in the area.
The project is expected to end by November this year. Penina Karibe, CGTN in Yaoundé, Cameroon.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. We have a lot more news coming your way, including Sudan President Omar al-Bashir slams groups behind protests that have rocked the country. And police maintain heavy presence in Harare, Zimbabwe as workers get back to work after 3 days of protest.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent, and the unique point at which two great oceans meet. Now on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, the place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN.
Welcome back. In Sudan, President al-Bashir has stressed that the only way to make changes in the government is through free and fair elections. He has also ruled out the effect of foreign intervention on ongoing protests in the country. He was addressing a mass rally in the city of Nyala in the South Darfur state. Bashir also commended efforts by neighboring countries to support Sudan during the eruption of the unrest. Deadly protests have rocked the country since December the 19th after a government decision to triple the price of bread.
The government in Khartoum does not change, not by demonstrations, not by someone coming from abroad. Who changes the government is Sudanese people, and one way is the way of the election ballots. Any person or political force that has a desire, we have no objection. If in the government or opposition, the referee between us and the election ballot boxes remains.
The process of delisting Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism by the United States is in jeopardy following a crackdown on protests in the country. The Troika countries, which includes the United States, has warned Sudan that it risks damaging engagement efforts over its response to the protesters. Khartoum is resisting what it calls this veiled threat from Washington. Daniel Ranges reports.
With protests in Sudan continuing, doubts are emerging among experts in Washington about the second phase of a US process to take Sudan off a list of state sponsors of terrorism. In order to get off the list, Sudan's been told to fulfill a set of very broadly stated requirements, including enhancing human rights protections and practices.
There are no benchmarks or no criteria, so there's really no way certainly for the public, and I don't know how the US government would assess that Sudan actually makes some kind of progress in those areas.
The Troika group of nations, comprising the UK, Norway and the United States, along with Canada, issued a statement warning Sudan that its response to the protests will have an impact on engagement of our governments and others in the coming months and years. Some foreign policy experts are still backing the US strategy, despite concerns about how the Sudanese government's handling protests in the country.
The likelihood of improvements in human rights in the Sudan is greater with the US engaging than with it sitting on the sidelines.
Among other delisting requirements for Sudan is expanding counterterrorism cooperation in a country where the US operates a sizable CIA base. The US State Department is refusing comment on Sudan for now as it struggles with the partial US government shutdown. Diplomats here have avoided imposing a timeline for Sudan, so the US could adopt a wait-and-see approach. For Sudan, delisting would ease its financial crisis, opening up lending support from institutions like the International Monetary Fund and providing a green light for foreign investors. Daniel Renches, CGTN, Washington.
The United Nations Security Council has expressed impatience over delays in the full implementation of Mali's peace process. Frustrated by security concerns and the lack of significant progress, France has threatened to seek further targeted sanctions against Mali. The U.S. said it could push to change the UN's peacekeeping mandate there. Our UN correspondent Yang Jelchi has details from New York.
The Security Council on Wednesday saw frustration, disappointment and impatience over the lack of momentum in implementing Mali's peace agreement. That agreement was reached in 2015 among feuding sides in the West African country to end a conflict now in its 6th year. France said it is ready to propose new sanctions if expectations are not met. And the U.S. warned that Washington could push to modify the mandate of the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, known as MINUSMA, if significant progress is not made. The warnings come at the end of a 3-month UN assessment that saw 2 peacekeepers and 3 MINUSMA contractors killed in attacks that also wounded dozens of people. Intercommunal violence in central Mali has also intensified. In one attack on January 1st, government officials said at least 37 villages were killed.
As I witnessed during my visit to Gao and Mopti, the security situation remains of grave concern and a major challenge to the implementation of the peace agreement. Asymmetric attacks continue to target peacekeepers, national and international forces, and increasingly civilians.
But the Security Council did welcome some encouraging steps on the security and political fronts. They included the launch of a program to disarm, demobilize and reintegrate combatants, as well as the setup of interim district-level administrations in the north of the country.
Today, people tested by 6 years of a multidimensional crisis.
There's a push to address shortcomings in security reform and holding a constitutional referendum. Now, the Security Council is also reportedly planning to visit Mali in March so that members can assess the situation for themselves and consider next steps. Yang Jelchi, CGTN, New York.
An international conference to refocus global health attention on Lassa fever, a deadly hemorrhagic disease in West Africa, has kicked off in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. The conference is being attended by hundreds of health researchers from across the world and aims to improve existing efforts to combat the disease.
An inspirational song at the largest ever held Lassa fever conference, calling on the world to rise up against a deadly disease that kills an estimated 5,000 every year in West Africa. And Nigeria, the host of the summit, bearing the heaviest burden of the disease. Its worst outbreak was recorded last year. Close to 200 were killed out of over 600 confirmed cases. And even as the conference gets underway, a new outbreak has been reported in 8 states, including the capital Abuja, where the summit is being held.
We're here to learn and relearn. We're here to ensure that going forward, Nigeria and the global community will rise to the challenge that Lassa fever presents. Sadly, over the last few days, We know that Lassa fever cases are trickling up again. We know that we have our job cut out for us. We know that the 3 key treatment centers we have in Nigeria are filling up again.
The first outbreak of the disease was recorded in the 1950s. Since then, an outbreak has been recorded in Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. The disease is primarily spread through contact with the urine or feces of rats. Secondary transmission is also possible from human to human through a direct contact with an infected person. Those infected with the disease present with Ebola-like symptoms. Early diagnosis can greatly improve the chance of survival, but authorities are now more focused on finding a vaccine against it.
Nigeria desires to be part of the process of improving diagnostics and therapeutics, and also of developing vaccines. We have developed a Lassa fever research plan that is aligned with the global research agenda. We shall invest more in training staff, in acquiring necessary equipment, in developing best protocols, and embracing best practices that help us to achieve results.
Even though numerous anti-Lassa fever vaccine research is being conducted around the world, all of them are yet to pass clinical tests. Dina Matengo, CGTN.
In Zimbabwe, police maintain a heavy presence in Harare as workers return to work after a 3-day stay-at-home protest. The demonstrations turned violent, leading to a loss of lives, damage of property, and looting of shops. CGTN's Farai Wakatuya tells us more.
Public transport is operating again. Some shops have reopened, but it's not yet business as usual. There have been no customers yet through the doors of this vehicle spares shop, which is counting the costs of the shutdown.
The 3 days we have spent at home have drawn us back to square one. I can't even quantify how much we have lost. It has virtually killed our business.
Analysts estimate the entire economy has lost over $250 million, a deficit it can ill afford as it battles a series of shortages, including fuel, which, despite the increase that sparked the protests, remains scarce.
The
fuel crisis won't go away overnight because it's a widespread problem. I think the solution is just to dollarize. There is exchange rate distortions with the bond note, so it's better to dollarize and then prices will stabilize.
Government has resisted calls to scrap the bond note and insists its value is equal to the greenback. It's awarded public servants a 23% allowance to mitigate the impact of the fuel price increase and general rise in the cost of living. President Emmerson Mnangagwa is on a 5-country tour to drum up support to prop up the ailing economy, but his bid may have been dealt a telling blow.
So there is no way you can run to invite friends, to invite investors whilst your backyard is burning. Right now Zimbabwe is burning, and it would be untimely for the president to try to sell the Zimbabwean brand, because right now the Zimbabwean brand is not sellable.
There is a growing feeling that solutions lie in political dialogue.
I think the past 36 hours has proved all and sundry that ZANU-PF cannot march alone. ZANU-PF cannot try to experiment with livelihoods, because at the end of the day there are genuine concerns by citizens which goes beyond political outfits, which needs to be ironed out. And this can only be done with unity of purpose. This can only be done by setting aside party political idiosyncrasies.
But entrenched differences which have seen the ruling party pin the blame for Monday's violence on the opposition MDC could scupper any meeting of the minds. If the two parties fail to find each other, then just like the motorists in this queue, Zimbabwe may have a long wait before things start to get better. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Recapping the headlines at this hour, the United Nations has launched investigations into a massacre it says killed almost 900 people in the Democratic Republic of Congo in December. The clashes between the Banunu and Batende communities led the Electoral Commission to postpone the elections in the Yumbi territory until March. The death toll from Tuesday's attack on a hotel in Nairobi, Kenya, has risen to 21. This follows the discovery of 6 bodies in the Dusit D2 hotel and office complex on Wednesday evening during a search and rescue exercise. Kenya's Red Cross Society also says that all 94 people that had been reported missing after the attack have been accounted for. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has met with his South Sudanese counterpart Salva Kiir in Cairo. The two discussed boosting of bilateral ties between their two countries. They also discussed mutual relations, regional issues, and South Sudan's peace agreement. Egypt has previously been involved in South Sudan's political affairs and peace process. And in Zimbabwe, police maintain a heavy presence in Harare as workers return to work after a 3-day stay-at-home of shops. And that is a wrap of your top stories. All right, let's go to Uche for the business news.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, drivers in Ethiopia stranded as a severe fuel shortage hits Addis Ababa. And public services ground to a halt in Tunisia as unions lead a strike demanding for better pay.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Well, let's start off in Ethiopia. A severe fuel shortage has hit the capital, Addis Ababa, and its surroundings. The deficit comes as a result of a 3-day road blockage by protesters in the city's bordering towns. Now, as CGTN's Girum Chale tells us, the negative consequences of the fuel tightness is heavily felt by the locals in the country.
Long queues around gas stations across the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Drivers waiting for hours to buy fuel, but with no luck. This is a result of 3 days of road blockage by protesters in the border towns of Afar and Somali regions. Drivers we spoke to say the situation has affected them in all aspects.
It's been 3 or 4 days now since we saw fuel in these stations. I came here at 4 in the morning, but still no luck. I'm not at work yet, and it's really affecting me and my employees.
I have been waiting to buy fuel for the last 2 days now. Yesterday I had hopes of getting something, but it was all in vain. And today I have been here since morning, and I don't even think I will get a chance.
There is a distribution problem with the little fuel available here. People are not fair to one another. They just want to profit out of the situation. I'm suffering, and this needs to be dealt with immediately.
The government said the roads are now open and it is addressing the situation at the moment. The protesters, who are demanding better governance and accountability within the local administration, have now accepted to go into a dialogue with regional authorities.
It has a temporary challenge, which is currently being addressed as well, and it had to do with the road closures as well. But that has been dealt with, and that the fuel supply is actually trucks that are carrying fuel loads, which had stopped because of their own fear of what might take place because of these road closures, have now started moving towards the center of the country.
These drivers and gas station owners will still have to wait for the gas to arrive from Sudan and Djibouti even after the roads are open. They are also asking the government to take steps that will ensure similar incidents in future. By and large, Ethiopian officials believe the security situation in the country has improved. And to sustain all of these, the reform is believed to have played a key role. However, experts suggest addressing the root cause of small protests and ethnic-based clash across the country should be a priority. Group Tara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's head to Tunisia now, where the labor union and the government failed to reach an agreement on new salary increases. As a result, a general strike was called in the public and civil sector. Now, the strike concerns employees of ministries, central, regional and local directorates, as well as civil service establishments. Public hospitals are also on strike with an emergency service. The public land, air and sea transport services were also suspended on Thursday.
Ali's long-time daily habit of the morning coffee and newspaper in downtown Tunis is his most sacred ritual. The 60-year-old retiree left the civil service this year after more than 3 decades of work and hardships. The Secretary General of the Syndicate of Retirees is heading to Mohammed Ali Square near the labor union's headquarters to join in the general strike of the public sector workers.
Claiming the right to a wage increase is the least we can do. The government is not credible. The people are hungry and the purchasing power is very low. The inflation has made money worthless.
Strikers chanted anti-government slogans, denouncing what they described as the worst socio-economic crisis in Tunisian history. The UGTT leader blamed the authorities for the levels of poverty and the decline of the middle class in Tunisia.
People are living in miserable conditions. The government should take responsibility. Tunisians are desperate and the state has turned a deaf ear to their pleas. We are ready to escalate if workers' demands are not met.
Following an unsuccessful meeting with UGTT leaders, the country's premier Youssef Al-Shahed regretted the general strike decision maintained by the labor union. Al-Shahed said the demands of protesters are legitimate, but the state does not have the necessary resources to finance additional salary hikes in 2019. Al-Shahed said the strike will lead to high costs, especially in view of the economic situation facing the country.
The government accepts that civil servants should have an appropriate income, given that they are an important part of the country's economy. We're counting on them for development. We also care that pensioners have respectable pensions after dedicating their lives to serving the nation, as well as improving the level of the poor, the unemployed, and those with unstable salaries.
The premier argued that even a salary increase cannot enable the workers attain their goals if it's not backed by economic growth.
All the increases granted after the 2011 revolution in the absence of real growth did not have an impact on citizens, but on the contrary, led to inflation, over indebtedness, the deterioration of citizens' purchasing power, not to mention the repercussions on the dinar and the interest rate in the banking sector.
According to the UGTT, the public transport is the most affected sector by the general strike. Tunis International Airport was paralyzed when all flights were cancelled. Yang Jelchi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, scores of passengers traveling to Zimbabwe from South Africa are stranded in the country's capital, Johannesburg. This follows the current unrest in Zimbabwe over President Emmerson Mnangagwa's decision to hike fuel prices in the country. Now, the crisis has caused regional bus lines to cancel all their services into the southern African state. Banks, schools and businesses have also been shut down in the country's capital of Harare and Bulawayo. Several people have also been killed, while others have been arrested in the country since the protests began on Monday.
We were supposed to go to Harare, Zimbabwe now. We are coming from Port Elizabeth, but we can't proceed because they are saying things are tough. The buses are being banned and the roads are blocked. It's total shutdown. So as for today, we have to sleep here in Joburg.
It's a big problem to my family because now I don't even know how they can survive. Because to send money to Zim, you can't send. There's no money in the banks.
Meanwhile, Belarus is planning to gradually advance a strategic level of cooperation with Zimbabwe. The country's president, Alexander Lukashenko, met up with his Zimbabwean counterpart, Emmerson Mnangagwa, in Minsk. Now, Mnangagwa is in Belarus on an official visit. Relations between the two countries are developing dynamically as Mnangagwa's visit is expected to boost bilateral relations between the two nations. Now, the visit of the Zimbabwean leader to Russia and Belarus in this week comes amidst a wave of protests in Zimbabwe against hikes in fuel prices. And he, of course, also got some advice from his host.
Mr. President, your country is going through hard times, but I want to point out that these hard times is what we experienced as well more than 20 years ago. Every country that tries to reform, enhance and build its economy and society goes through this difficult stage.
Zimbabwe has gone through severe economic sanctions and isolation for now nearly 2 decades. As a result of those severe economic sanctions imposed by the West on us, they collapsed our currency in 2009.
And shifting focus now, major Italian oil company Eni has recorded an overall investment of $13 billion in Egypt since 2015. Now, this emerged during a meeting between Eni's delegation and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in Cairo. The CEO of the company, Claudio Descalzi, affirmed that the firm is still looking forward to increasing its investments in the North African state. Now, but in 2018, Egypt's natural gas consumption increased in local production. Egypt has developed major gas fields across the Mediterranean. It also aims to become a regional gas hub across the continent. And shifting to the latest on the U.S. shutdown, more and more Americans are being affected as the longest partial government shutdown in the country's history continues to drag on. Millions under the state's food stamp program are still uncertain as to how long the shutdown will continue to linger. Here's CGTN's Alistair Beverstock with this report.
As the longest government shutdown in U.S. history drags on, the future of food stamp delivery is anything but certain. Some 38 million Americans rely on the federal aid program, known officially as SNAP. To provide February's benefits, officials had to get creative and cleared payments to go out early by January 20th. But if the shutdown lingers into March, this critical assistance for low-income families may be in jeopardy. That's sparking worry across the country, including at this food bank in the nation's capital, where government figures show 1 in 6 residents depends on food stamps. Food banks are charitable organisations providing food for the most marginalised in society. But as the longest government shutdown in US history continues, these organisations are bracing for an influx of people who aren't getting paid and suddenly struggling to feed their families. Kim Cox, who runs the Father McCare Food Bank, says her team is ready.
I feel pretty confident that we have sufficient supply to get us through this government shutdown. But I think that the stress that it's causing on these families is absolutely unconscionable and unnecessary.
Last Saturday, the capital's largest food bank set up aid stalls for federal government workers who haven't had a paycheck since the end of December. It can be a humbling experience for those caught up in the shutdown.
I think a lot of people's pride gets in their way of not going to the food banks. You know, I think that's one of the problems. And then they don't know the programs that are out there. It goes back to that pride. Some people don't want to take that assistance because they've worked so hard to get off food stamps. They don't want to revert back to it.
Lester Munson is a political analyst and says that those forced to seek charitable aid are simply pawns caught up in Washington's political game.
This is really about power politics at this point. It's really over
a couple $2 billion, which is a drop in the bucket in the U.S. federal budget. So it's really not about the money, and it's not so much about the policy. The longer this goes on, the more issues we're going to see where people's lives are impacted by the federal government failing them.
With negotiations to end the shutdown deadlocked, hope remains that the sight of bread lines on the capital's streets might help tip the balance and motivate lawmakers to get government working once more. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Washington.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up on Global Business Africa, the state capture inquiry resumes in South Africa. We have some of those damning revelations on the level of corruption amongst government officials in the country. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, it's back to you.
All right, thank you, Uche. This is Africa Live on CGTN. Here's a sneak peek at what's ahead. The device that's making a huge difference for expectant women in Uganda.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. A Uganda startup has developed a portable ultrasound gadget that will help people in remote parts of the country to have access to affordable scans. The M-Scan device is cheaper than conventional ultrasound devices and can be used with a laptop, tablet, or smartphone. CGTN's Laura Walabengo has more.
The portable ultrasound device having a major impact on health facilities in remote parts of Uganda. Connected to laptops, tablets or smartphones, it can allow users to send their scans to specialists for further analysis at much affordable rates compared to existing devices. It is a product of a Ugandan company called M-Scan and is changing lives for pregnant women in low-income or rural areas.
As you may know, in most rural areas, electricity is just a luxury. So when we were posted there, other people were carrying out their jobs, and for us, our hands were tied. We could not use the knowledge that we're learning in school in the hospitals where we were posted. And then mothers kept dying of conditions that we knew could have been scanned on ultrasound and prevented.
Phyllis launched the device in 2017 and is now introducing it to various health centers across Uganda. It costs about $2,500. It's nearly half the price of similar machines that are only available to big hospitals. The company regularly holds outreach programs offering free scanning services for pregnant mothers.
We've so far held 3 camps and we've scanned over 100 mothers. And of those 100, we've detected 16 complications in these mothers, and these mothers' lives were saved.
M-Scan is mainly funded through grants and prize money won in various tech competitions. An ultrasound costs $20 per scan at a hospital. The innovators hope to eventually help bring down ultrasound costs to about $3.
It's so comfortable, it's so easy, and it's convenient. I think it is a lifestyle we have to adopt.
Phyllis and her team plan to take the device to more parts of Uganda and also market it around the continent.
The world's third largest film industry, Nollywood, continues to take center stage with groundbreaking movies that have been viewed by millions on international streaming platforms. The latest is Up North, a story of love and self-discovery that has been dubbed Nigeria's largest movie production. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more on the film that is considered Nigeria's most ambitious movie ever.
What's up, Daddy-O?
The movie is being hailed as a bridge between Nigeria's north and south, and a unique showcase of the other side of a part of the country tainted by the narrative of conflict, hunger and strife. It's set in Nigeria's northeastern state of Bauchi, and deliberately so, says producer and executive producer Editi Effiong.
Up North was inspired by a journey, a cultural journey I took off of Nigeria. I visited most of the states in Nigeria, but I spent a lot of time in the north. And I met people, I spoke to people, I got this new experience with a culture I hadn't really experienced. And after that journey through the country in 2015, I kind of had made a decision to tell new stories about Nigeria that we don't often tell.
The movie tells the story of how a billionaire father sends his rebellious son to the north for a mandatory one-year national youth service. The son later falls in love, makes new friends and finds his life's purpose in an environment he dreaded at first. The film also casts the spotlight on the topical issue of female education and the empowerment of the girl child in a region of Nigeria where the issue remains a big talking point.
From the reviews I've seen, people are excited about the quality of the film, the details of the film, how detailed it was. And I want to think that the efforts that was put into the film was important to making the film successful.
In terms of records in the Nollywood industry, Up North has set some. It's the largest film production in Nigeria and even West Africa as a whole, with a full-time cast and crew of over 150, while the largest day of filming involved 25,000 extras.
When we went there, we wanted to shoot a very big film. It turns out we were trying to shoot the biggest film ever made in Nigeria. Nobody had the experience to shoot a scene with 25,000 people. You know, none of us had the experience, so just getting people in a row, in rows, and getting to shoot that big, expansive scene was quite challenging, but I'm really grateful to the director, to the crew, this one needs to be done and will be done, and they just buckled down and did the great work that had to be done.
Hey, red shirt!
With no investor willing to put their money down to fund the movie project, Editi's and Knuckles film startup had to raise the over $300,000 needed to shoot the film all on its own.
I want to think that in future projects we'll have more institutional funding because when you make a film for the first time, it's hard to raise money for that because nobody really believes if you're going to do it. I remember one of the actors who was going to be on the project saw the script and said, I would like to be a part of this, but I don't know if you guys can execute this at the scale that is written here.
Up North is already in cinemas across Nigeria and Ghana, and of course it's doing very well. The producer says the movie will soon be in the United States and the United Kingdom, as well as on international streaming platforms like Netflix. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
All right, time now for another short break. When we return, it's your sports news.